start the music here in 3, 2, 1. Welcome to the Mandatory Social Interaction Show. I'm your host, Eric, along with my co-host, my furtive co-host, Ben. Furtive.
Yup.
And unfortunately, Tim is on assignment this week, so he won't be joining us. He is busy with work today, unfortunately for him. So we all feel for him. We've all been there. Unfortunately, work doesn't always give you the best work-life balance that you would want, but that's the way things go. I like the cat dance.
Yeah.
That was good.
He's been crawling all over the desk today, so I have to just keep removing him from the desk. And I figure since we started the thing, he might as well dance with us. So
Absolutely. So
Yep.
so which one is that? I can't remember their names.
this is Tito.
Tito.
He's the little one. He's the handsome one of the boy band.
Tito the vodka cat.
Yeah, he's the handsome one, and Trevor's like the bassist. He's kind of the beefy guy, but he's a little bit more refined. And then Tux is the older one, and then Lady wouldn't really fit into a boy band, but she'd be like the lead or the drummer.
That is a great idea.
She gives zero craps about everything.
M has an amazing idea. The cat should replace Tim for today. I do like that idea. I'm not sure how we could pull it off right now, but
yeah, unfortunately, I don't know how to send in another video feed.
that would be incredible. I think for next time we will figure out a way. If someone's not going to be here, we'll have some kind of like cat cam.
Mm-hmm.
So, all right, let's see. Well, I have a couple of things to talk about today. The first one, do you want to do the big subject first, or the smaller subject first?
Let's start with the little one, because we know we'll be able to knock that out in time.
All right, so the little one is something I think we all deal with, and I see it often. I've seen it a million times on like the 2-hour album challenge, and I've seen it, a bunch of places, including our friend Tim, and that is imposter syndrome. Something you mentioned right before the show, and I thought, that's a thing to talk about, because I don't think we've talked about it before. And that's the feeling that you are, that you're faking it, that you're not really the thing that you purport to be. You're not really a composer. You're not really a performer. You're not really a streamer. You're just kind of faking it. And that could be a whole subject in itself. I don't know why you think that's a small one. But the big one is about art in general, so I think this is smaller than that.
Yeah, I guess comparatively. So yeah, like I believe imposter syndrome as a global thing is when you like look at somebody else's work and you're just like, well, I'm never going to be that good, so why do I do anything at all? And you end up kind of psyching yourself out. I apologize for the coughing, by the way. I'm trying my hardest to tamp it down. But yeah, so I guess the best advice for imposter syndrome is that everybody gets it. Everybody from like musically, everybody from like myself and some of the like the lower tier YouTube musicians all the way up to Andrew Wong, like everybody gets imposter syndrome. It doesn't matter how big you are.
Yeah.
Because there's always somebody better than you. And I mean that's a fact, and that's okay. That's something that's you should learn to live with, because it's not a bad thing. It's always good to have somebody to aspire like toward.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, one of the things
it's not just limited to music.
Oh yeah, totally not limited to music. This is something that I think all creative people struggle with is, and I can I'm going to give a musical example because it's something that I'm struggling with right now. I'm writing a song that is in a genre I don't normally write in. And I'm really enjoying it, and I'm like, oh, this is really cool. I really like it. It's this kind of dark Berlin techno thing that I have no experience with. I've never done this before. I've never, it's like it's stuff that I hear, and I've always gone, oh, I can't do that. oh, that's, I have no frame of reference for that, and now I'm trying to do it, and I'm very much struggling with the idea that, how I'm struggling with, like, how authentic is this? Is this really the thing? Am I really making the thing, or am I just kind of faking it, or half-assing it, or like, or am I like making a not a mockery of it, but like an imitation of it? That's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, yeah.
Is this imitation Berlin techno, and real Berlin techno is the stuff that I listen to, or or am I really doing the thing? And it's really hard. And Ben knows this because I've sent him like 5 different versions of this thing. Hey, try this. What do you think of that? Because and normally I don't do that. Normally I send, more or less along a full version, or I post it in Discord or something.
Yeah.
But this time I'm like so kind of apprehensive about it, because I feel like it's so far out of my comfort zone. And it's like, I really do feel like I'm faking it. Like, nah, this isn't really the thing. I'm just kind of imitating, and that's a really hard feeling to get over.
It is, but especially since you're working toward a specific genre, all of that is imitation to some degree. Like,
True,
it's all
true.
iteration on stuff that already exists. Nobody's going to, aside from rare instances where stuff like dubstep was, like kind of birthed out of almost nothing. Like, it was kind of a mishmash between a lot of things, but like a lot of this stuff kind of just comes from iteration on prior things. So it's like saying that, oh, I'm just copying somebody else. It's like, well, yeah, so does everybody else. So
Right.
that's definitely something to keep in mind if you start feeling bad about this, or if you start feeling like what you're making isn't genuine. And this isn't really directed specifically towards you. It's really towards,
No, I get it. Yeah.
in general.
Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, it's like, you can feel bad about your work, but that's not necessarily a bad thing, because I think that that's something that helps drive you and push you forward. But if you feel like your work isn't authentic, then that's when you should really start to think about why you think that. And that might be more related toward the imposter syndrome, and then that should be something that's evaluated. Because if you're feeling like what you're making isn't authentic, then you need to kind of just take a break and figure out why. Because everything you make is authentic. Even your first song is something, unless you're like doing paint by numbers or copy pasting loops in, like from a dubstep thing or like a sample pack. Like, everything you make is something that's unique to you, because you did it.
and even in those instances, if you're copying and pasting loops and stuff, if you put any of your own spin on it, that makes it, it suddenly becomes, it goes from being this kind of inauthentic paint by numbers thing to, it could very well be a very unique thing by the time you're done with it.
Yeah, exactly.
And one thing, I think Em is saying in the chat, the popular saying, fake it till you make it. And one of the things I feel like that is a double-edged sword, because I feel like, on the one hand, yeah, absolutely. Like, the idea is do the thing until you're doing the thing and you're an expert at it. But I think the downside of that is that I think exacerbates, and I don't want to say it causes, but it exacerbates the idea of imposter syndrome, because how do you know that you've made it and that you're not just continually faking it?
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense, and that works. But I mean, I always feel like I'm faking it. I always feel like and I've said this before, when I start a 2-hour track challenge, I am terrified like 90% of the time, because I'm going to be like, oh, is this the time where I don't like finish the thing or whatever? And it's just like, no, it's like, you just sit down and you do the work and things happen. And I mean, fake it till you make it doesn't have to be this overarching like 2-year plan. It could be, I sit down and I kind of fake knowing what I'm doing until some things kind of fall into place, and then all the pieces start to like coalesce into a song, and then you can make it from there. Like, that's not necessarily the traditional way of like reading that phrase, but I think that it's important, even on like a micro level, to understand that, you know, like sometimes people just sit down, and I mean, I've been doing the 2 hour track challenge for like 150 episodes almost now, and it's like I still don't know what I'm doing most of the time.
Yeah.
It's just kind of sitting down and letting things happen. And yeah, and Mintrovert, to respond to what you said you don't like the everything has already been invented mindset, and I completely agree with that. I don't think everything's already been invented. It's just all the pieces are out there already. You just have to combine them in novel ways to create something new. And I don't think that that's anything new either. Like, I think all the pieces have been out there since synthesizers were invented, like 60 years ago or whatever. So
Yeah, and looking at what Hambrooms is saying in the chat here too. He has a feeling of, I haven't made it until I've made the thing, and then like that constant there's that like constant drive of like, okay, I made it one time, but that was just a fluke.
Well, if it makes you feel better, I've done the 2 hour track challenge 140 times or whatever, and I feel like those are still a fluke. So
I mean, and that's the thing, like, and I think bringing this up and calling attention to it is important, because it's not an easy thing to get over. And I don't think anybody necessarily gets completely over that feeling of of that I'm faking it, that I'm not the expert I pretend to be. And it's a difficult thing. And I kind of want to touch on what Toxic said, and I'm curious, and I wonder if he'll clarify a little bit. Because he says he always feels like he couldn't be as good as anybody else's track in the 2 hour album challenge, but he kind of feels like what actually happens is the opposite. He's kind of stepped out of his comfort zone and is sort of copying what he's seen others do with that same limitation. And I mean, that sounds about right. I mean, to be honest with you, when I do the 2 hour album challenge, I am doing my best Ben Burns impression. Because I've watched Ben do his, the 2 hour track challenge a bunch. And so I am doing my best to, make quick decisions and try to kind of emulate what I see Ben doing, to do the best I can within the limitations. So I would kind of agree with what Toxic is saying there, that, there's something to be said for watching someone else's process and emulating it a little bit. And I know I do that even outside the 2 hour album challenge. I know I've watched people's process videos for a lot of things to get ideas for my own creative stuff. And that's really, what's funny about Fake It Till You Make It and Imposter Syndrome is that, and we've kind of touched on in terms of genre, but it's really more than just genre, is imitation is super important. I mean, part of, if we didn't have imitation, you wouldn't have, more than one guitarist in the world, right? I mean, because no one would play the guitar because everyone would be, oh, you're copying that guy. Right? So, I mean, imitation is kind of important, and taking what you can from other people's work and applying it to your own is a creative process that's very important. It's hard sometimes to know where you've been successful, and I think kind of coming out the other side of this, I'm kind of thinking maybe one way to combat imposter syndrome is to have a personal definition of success. In other words, definitely. I will have, this will be successful when, fill in the blank, right? It'll be successful when it's done and 5 people have heard it and said it was good. It'll be successful when I'm happy with it in a week, or whatever that thing is. Whatever your definition is, having that end, like that goalpost, I think is important.
Yeah, and when I interview people, on the rare instances where I interview people on the Creative Exploration series, that is one of my questions that I always ask. Hi Al. Instead of what am I trying to say? What would you consider yourself like making it?
Yeah.
Aside from financial stability, how would you consider yourself as made it? Like, what are your current goals? And I think that that's really important to have in mind when you're doing this stuff, because as long as you can see forward that process, I can't talk anymore. I'm sorry. As long as you see forward process towards your goals, that's really the important part.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that it goes back to that authenticity thing where it's like, yeah, if you don't like the song that you made, that's okay. Or the piece of art that you made. If you don't like the piece of art that you made, that's okay. But if you feel like what you made isn't authentic, like it isn't authentically you, that's when like you might have more problems with imposter syndrome. Because I think that when you make something, it's important to realize that it's yours and it's not anybody else's. And if you like take into your heart that it's yours, if it's like, well, yeah, it sounds kind of hippy dippy, but it's like if you believe that it's your process, if you believe it's your project and the art that you made, then it doesn't necessarily matter as much whether or not it's good or bad. Like that's just a stepping stone in your artistic career. Then it's like, okay, this is bad and this is why it's bad, and I'm not going to do those anymore.
Right.
But if you make something that's be like, oh, this is just another deadmau5 song, it's like, well, then try not to do that. Try to make something that's like yours. Like take the general ideas of a deadmau5 song and like put your own spin on it and try to do something that he doesn't, and that's how you make it yours.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm sorry, I'm trying to read the chat here too.
Oh, it's okay.
You know, and I think Hambrams here is right, in that like imposter syndrome is kind of this like weird misguided perspective in relation to what you do.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and that's exactly right, is you do kind of have to define that limit for yourself of what is copying deadmau5 and what is and what is putting your own spin on a deadmau5 style track. And one of the things is you know, people do that all the time. I mean, I'll read interviews with producers, and this is very music centric, but I think it applies to other art too. I will read interviews with producers who say, oh yeah, that track was my take on a, you know, fill in the blank, you know, someone that track was my take on a Tiesto style Ibiza track, you know.
Yeah,
like
I mean, that's basically what you're doing right now too.
Yeah.
You're doing a take on Berlin, what was it, Berlin?
Like dark
house?
It's like dark techno, Berlin style
dark
stuff.
techno.
Yeah. You know, and it's like, yeah, I'm kind of trying to figure out what the, you know, what the genre is, like how does that genre kind of work, because arrangement wise it's way different than like a house track. You know, they're doing much more subtle things. House tracks have really big build-ups and breakdowns, and you know, they're like they make really big distinctions between sections. And these techno tracks are much more subtle. Like just the kick drum will fall out for 8 bars, and you're like, oh, like I didn't notice that until I put headphones on and like listened to it a third time, and then like, oh yeah, like they just kind of dropped out the kick, and then like the kick comes back, and you know, maybe they've ramped up just a little bit of something else, so that at the end of 8 bars that kick drum comes back and it feels like a little bit of a big hit, but it's not this big giant epic thing like it is in like a house track.
Yeah, exactly.
And I don't want this to be the, you know, the dark techno hour either, so we don't have to go super detailed.
It was a good example of what we were talking about though.
Yeah.
Fail to imposter your own. Yeah, M says the worst feeling is when you fail to imposter your own music, and I don't think that's a bad thing.
Yeah.
Like I didn't really feel like I had my own quote unquote style for a very long time until somebody mentioned it to me, and I was like, oh, I guess I do. But it's like I don't necessarily go into a song being like, okay, so this is what I've done in the past, so I guess I should just do this again. I just kind of listen to what the music currently is, and like then I try to hear what I'd like that music to become. And I think that's what a lot of art actually is. It's just making something that doesn't exist, or making something that you would like to exist. And that's something we talked about in the Discord a long time ago, where basically just make art that you want to exist, and that's really all that it is.
And I want to speak to what M said there, because I've had that problem. So you sit down a week ago and you work on something and you go, "Oh, this is really cool. I love this thing that I came up with," maybe you breeze through this thing in like 4 hours and you're like, "Holy crap, this song is really cool. This really speaks to what I want to do." And so, a few days or a week later, you sit down with the same stuff, right? The same device, the same, whatever. Or maybe you're making, maybe you're painting and maybe it's just the same set of paints, right? But either way, you sit down with the same set of things and you're like, "Man, this really worked the last time. This is going to be amazing this time." And you sit down and an hour later, you have nothing. And you're like, or what you have, you're just like, "This is not going anywhere. This is not what I wanted, or this like feels awful," or,
Yeah.
and it's like, why is it that last week this was like amazing and I sat down and this just was effortless, and this week it's dragging and I can't get anything going, and it's just like, man, this is just such crap.
Well, that's the mystery of being an artist.
It kind of is, but I agree. It does feel like, it's like you were trying to imitate last week, and it's almost this like cargo cult thing where like, I'm gonna put all the same pieces in all the same places, and it's gonna magically appear, and it did last week, but I put all those same pieces into place this week, and then nothing.
Yeah, and actually the opposite happened to me today, where last week I tried to make a song using the sample pack and it just turned out garbage. And then today, before we did the podcast, I sat down and I whipped out a really cool song in like 2 hours, and that made me really happy. Using the exact same, the song was based off of a sample pack from Garden Sound that he posted last week. And I was using the exact same samples. It's just the way that I put them together made a lot more sense today. And the way that I put them together last week did not. And I just kind of stalled out after an hour with basically nothing. And then today, like, I powered through and like I made basically an entire song in less than 2 hours. So
yeah,
I don't know how it works. Like that's the that's the problem.
And
like,
the funny thing, like,
there's no art button.
And there should be.
Yeah.
And that's the funny thing is what Em is saying. It's like, you can put all these pieces in place, and it's amazing how one day, it's amazing how one day it's almost like flipping a coin. One day it ends up amazing, the next day it's not, or the vice versa. Like you can't get it going, and all of a sudden it's like, boom, this thing just spontaneously appears, and you're like, holy crap, finally this thing is amazing. And what's funny though is this is all about a feeling. It's not really about the art, right? It's about your kind of perceptions about your art, and your kind of self-perception of, when it's not going the way you want it to go, you're like, I'm not an artist. This is crap. It's not, I'm clearly not the thing that I'm purporting to be. And then when it's going amazing, you're like, holy crap. This is, and it's easy to talk yourself into thinking that's a fluke. And it's hard to kind of talk yourself to say, it's hard to kind of talk yourself into saying, well, that's part of the process. Like the process of art is messy and fraught with failure. And that's not a thing that people want to hear. Because
it's very easy to feel like art should be a constant grade up. Yeah. When instead of like an up and down, like more of a roller coaster. And it's very easy to just expect a linear curve upwards constantly as an artist, and it's always a series of plateaus and dips, and then spikes in quality, and then plateaus, and then dips. And M brought up a very good point where it's just like sometimes when you're making stuff, you set your standards too high. And when you set your standards too high, you're basically guaranteeing failure. And this is something that happens a lot during the 2-hour track challenge, where I'm like, okay, this song was great and the last song was great. Everything I'm going to make from now on is going to be great. And then the next 3 songs are kind of garbage because I set my standards so high. It's like, well, this doesn't sound as good as it could be. So let's spend, 20 minutes trying to do this. And then I piss away a half hour, and all of a sudden I don't have anything and I have to kind of scramble near the end. So it's like going in, always setting the bar low helps a lot, actually. And that doesn't necessarily mean that you expect a low quality product in the end, but when you're starting, setting that bar low, like not having a great expectation for what you're going to end up with, that can help so much.
Yeah, and one thing I also wanted to mention is, as artists and, musicians and whatever people are making, everyone is like constantly comparing themselves to other artists, right? You're always looking at another artist. Maybe they're famous, maybe they're not super famous, but for whatever reason, you look at them and you have respect for them. And the thing that people forget often is what you always see from artists is the successes. You never actually see the failures because they've either been turned into successes over a period of time, and and with whatever that process was, or they were deemed not releasable,
unfit.
And I mean, and that's up to that's like the artist's prerogative, right? Like, I'm not going to put this one out there. I think this is just a learning experience for me. And there's nothing wrong with that, but that's one of those things. That's one of those things that people forget is, some of the biggest bands in the world, when you read the process behind like their album release, it's like, yeah, we wrote 30 songs, we released 12.
Ugh, that sounds terrible.
And I'm not saying that's the best process ever, but what I'm saying is, like, people don't realize that when you get a product from an artist, whatever that is, it's the culmination of a lot of failures that you didn't see. And as a matter of fact, there's and I'm not going to get the story right, but I'm going to try anyway. There was this old Japanese proverb of, like, a guy goes to an artist and says he wants a painting of a duck, and the artist says, okay, that'll be 1 month, and however many, hundreds of yen. And the guy says, okay, and he comes back a month later, and he says, hey, where's the picture, where's my painting of a duck? And the artist says, oh, hang on, and he pulls out a canvas and, in an hour paints him a beautiful portrait of a duck. And the patron is like, okay, well, why didn't I have that in an hour a month ago? And the artist says, well, come over here, and opens the closet, and in the closet, outpours, like 100 canvases of failed duck paintings.
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, I've been practicing this for a month so that I could do this right now.
Yeah, exactly.
And you never see that failure of art. You only ever see the successes.
Yeah. I know when I was talking to Jeremy from Red Wings Recording, he said that, like, his OP1 videos, he usually records like 2 or 3 hours worth of footage, and then he crops that down into 20 minutes worth of actual video that goes out onto the YouTube page.
Yeah.
Or the YouTube video. And it's just like, I didn't know that he had so much cutting room floor footage. I thought that it was more of a linear process for him, but it was really interesting to hear that. And like Toxic was saying, that's the main reason why I released Formative, which is an album, like a collection of music that I made from like 1998 to 2006 or something. All of my very, very early music that was like released on tapes and CDs and stuff like that. Because I think that it's very interesting to see where people come from, and I wanted to share that experience with other people. And I mean, it's also nice to stream for that reason too, because I like sharing my failures, because apparently that's a thing for me, I guess. But I like sharing the failures because it shows that everybody fails. And I don't want to like put myself out as some like, oh, big name musician, I'm so important. But it's important to like understand that everybody fails at this stuff, even if they've been doing it for 140 episodes. It's like,
Yeah.
even 3 months ago or whatever, I had my first official failure for the 2-hour track challenge where the song took 3 hours, and it's like, it happens. It's just, that's what it is. It happens. I finished the song and I moved on.
Yeah. And that's one of those things also, I think, is, and one thing I will say is I think you're doing important work by showing the process and then showing the failure. And I know that sounds very pretentious.
It does sound pretentious, but I agree. Like,
I think
it's important to show this stuff.
I think when people see the process, it helps. I think as an artist, it helps to see someone else's process, because maybe your process isn't my process, but seeing what someone else is doing gives me ideas to modify my own process and take from your process and say, oh, well, Ben kind of does it this way, so I'm going to try that, or I'm going to take a piece of that and put my own spin on it, and that becomes part of my process. And that's something that I really appreciate is I can't tell you how many times I've looked for process type videos on online. And here's a good example. One of the things I like to do that I don't really show a lot is I'm fascinated by doing like VJ style visuals. And I'm not particularly good at it, but I enjoy messing around with it. And one thing that's really hard to find is how do you put together a VJ set?
Yeah.
And it's really funny.
I have no idea.
it's really, really funny how there's like no... If you want to put together a set for a DJ, there's like DJ Tech Tools and all these great places. But if you start looking at VJ stuff, it's like there's an absolute dearth of people trying to like explain their process. Like, here's how I put together a set that lasts a 2-hour show. I have multiple pieces and I put it together this way, and then I can flop between them and blah, whatever that is. That's remarkably not there. And
you just gotta figure it out and then make those videos, and you'll be YouTube famous. TM.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing is, it's like, and you're looking, and this goes back to imitation. It's like, I'm looking for something to imitate and iterate on. And just, it's like, it's not there. So now I feel like I have to invent it. And it's like, this stuff has been invented before. But we're kind of digressing a little bit. So,
well, this was also supposed to be the small topic. So.
Oh man! Wow, we spent 40 minutes on the small topic.
Yup.
That's really funny.
And I know what you mean. M mentioned that there's sometimes he's been doing a 2-hour track challenge where in the middle of it he's like, "Yeah, screw this," and ended the stream. And there were some outside. He said there were some outside factors involved, but it wasn't going anywhere. And I know how that feels so much.
Yeah.
I think I actually did that pretty recently, where I spent like 20 minutes on a song. I'm just like, "F this, it's not going anywhere," and I just basically did Control N and started a new project. It sucks, but I think that's one of the reasons why going and doing this stream is so valuable, or the 2-hour track challenge. It doesn't have to be a stream, but just giving yourself a time limit to do that. It's so valuable, because it's like, you just have to be in the mindset where it's like, when the 2 hours are done, I want to have something that I'm reasonably happy with.
Yeah.
And it's like, it doesn't have to be a masterpiece, but it just has to be something. But yeah, it's just like, sometimes you just got it. And I mentioned this, excuse me, I mentioned this during my stream earlier, but I've been reading the book On Writing by Stephen King, which is a fantastic book. Not necessarily just for writing, people who write, but for any creative endeavor. It's very, very worth reading. But one of the things that he mentions over and over and over is the phrase "kill your darlings," where it's just like, you might absolutely love this little piece of music or this little piece of thing that you're working on, but you just got to kill it and start over because it's not going anywhere.
Yeah.
And just having that mindset where you can slash and burn and just move on, I think is very important. And thankfully, it's not like the 1980s anymore. You can actually just save as and just start a new project from there, and you won't lose anything, but you'll have the ideas, you'll have a blank canvas again, and new ideas can spawn from that. And I think that it's important to not always just get frustrated with something and quit, but just to get frustrated with something and just hit Control N and start over.
Yeah, absolutely. And like one thing I will say is, even if you have bad ideas, they're usually worth saving. Because going back, and when I say bad ideas, I don't mean objectively bad. I mean when you say, hey, this isn't going anywhere, don't dump it, save it, because I can't tell you how many times I've looked through like my old kind of ideas folder, looking for, hey, I need something to complete this album, or I'm looking for, maybe an idea that I had that didn't go anywhere at one point, and I've found so many things that I've gone, oh, this is actually kind of cool, and now that I'm a year out from it, I have some thought on how to complete this and how to make it go a direction that I wasn't feeling before, but now it's like, oh, I can make this thing happen, and it's going to totally fit into this new thing that I'm working on.
Yeah, most definitely.
It's surprising how kind of often that happens.
Yeah, I also have a folder like that where sometimes I go through it and it's like 80% of these are awful, but some of these are kind of decent ideas. So I know where it goes.
I think to sum this up and move on to something else, we will say set your threshold for success and don't set it too high. Decide in advance what success is. Or if you're an agile programmer, create your definition of done. And when you hit that success, realize that that's not fake. You did that, and you're not, and give yourself that credit of you are the thing you want to be. You're not just pretending. And I think that might be the overarching and easy to say and hard to follow through with, message from this. But it's and I think the other takeaway here is everyone suffers from imposter syndrome. You're not alone.
Everybody.
You're not alone. Huge stars, if you want to call them that. People who are quite famous for doing what they do, have all said. I've read many interviews with very famous people who are like, yeah, I still feel like I'm an imposter. I'm not even convinced that I'm, a musician or an actor or whatever they do. But apparently people like it and they pay me for it. So, so, I mean, we're not, you're not the only one, and you're also, in good company.
Cool. Yeah. So, that's a really good, synopsis of all of that.
we could have
really have anything to add.
We could have started there and saved ourselves 45 minutes.
No, it's a good topic. It's a really good conversation.
I'm kidding. So the other thing I wanted to talk about, and this is a very kind of a philosophical thing, but I'm interested in it, and this actually speaks into, like we were talking about genre earlier. So this is a quote from C. Robert Cargill. Actually, it was a tweet. He was one of the writers on the Marvel Doctor Strange movie, and he's also written some other books and movies, and he was a film critic for Ain't It Cool News way back in the day. He's kind of been around for a while, and what he has to say here, and I thought this was interesting, is art is half of what you make and half the mental baggage the audience brings with them. You can't guarantee everyone will like it, but if you pay enough attention to the latter part of that equation, you can ensure that a certain segment does and not feel too bad about the rest. So that I think is interesting, and that's talking about, speaking to your audience, playing with their preconceptions, and it's something that I was kind of struck by, like, it doesn't matter what you do to a certain extent, because people are gonna kind of put their own spin on it in their I'm not gonna say in their mind, I guess. Yeah, they're gonna, but they're gonna bring their own stuff to it. you know, and they're going to project their own thoughts and feelings onto the thing that you do.
Well, we can have story time with Ben here. So, a very long time ago, back in the mid '90s, late '90s, I was making music, but I wasn't really doing it like reliably or professionally or anything. I still hadn't come up with a band name. I was still using my old internet. My internet call sign back then was B Fusion, because for some reason I thought that was really cool because my first and last name starts with B, so you know, whatever. But as I started releasing music and I started putting music out there for other people to hear, mainly my family and some friends. Yep, that joke has been made. Beef using somebody.
Sorry,
yeah, you posted that in chat. That's fine. Anyway, as people started listening to my music, they always came back to me with mental imagery, and none of that mental imagery was the same. And I found that absolutely fascinating, where one song could elicit so many different like images and feelings and stuff from everybody else because it was based upon those emotional reactions were based upon their, like you said, their emotional baggage, like their history, their memories, their feelings towards certain things. And that is where I got the name abstraction from, because music in that sense is an abstraction of memory, because everybody experiences music differently, even if it's the same song, the exact same song. Even two people sitting in like a car listening to the same song will experience that song differently based upon their past, their emotional baggage, and all of that stuff. And that was so amazingly powerful to me. And that's why I went with the name abstraction, because it was such a unique and weird concept. And I really love it. And I guess that's, I mean, it's a really powerful concept to me. So I totally agree with, I can't remember who said the quote, but I totally agree with that. Yeah.
And that's funny because I've had similar experiences with, just talking with people about, I love this piece of music, and here's how I feel about it. Don't you hear, this thing or this setting or have this imagery? And the other person is like, no, not at all. Like, that's totally not what I get from that. And I'm like, oh wow, I kind of thought that was what everybody got from that, and clearly that's not the case. And it's really interesting to me how much of art is what we bring to it. And just walking around, if anyone's ever gone to an art museum, walking around an art museum, especially something where, especially if it's more of a modern art museum and less of kind of the classical art. I mean, there's nothing wrong with classical art, but classical art tends to have very concrete imagery, where it's very clearly a portrait of a lady, or it's very clearly a landscape of a bridge or something like that. Whereas the abstract kind of things, that I've seen that are put together, and that doesn't mean abstract painting where it's just a black shape on a white canvas or something. Although that can be cool too, but like some of the other things that I've seen that are more modern art, that are maybe mixed media or performance art, those things are really, really interesting because the art is your interpretation of it.
Yeah, exactly.
It really boils down to, you're walking through this museum and you see something and it strikes you in a particular way, and the person you're with might just look at it and go, "Oh, it's just this thing," and you're like, "No, this is this whole thing," and it's like mentally you're like, "Whoa, this is blowing me away," and like somebody next to you is going like, maybe not, and it's all your interpretation. It's all
interpretation. Yeah,
it's really interesting to me how many things are like that. Movies, art, any kind of art. I mean, it's really it's just interesting. And I guess one of the things I wanted to maybe where I wanted to go with this is the second half of his quote is, if you pay attention to the mental baggage your audience is bringing with them, you can ensure that that a certain segment is going to like your stuff.
Yep.
And ensure is, I would assume somewhat in quotes. I mean, that's it's difficult to guarantee that people will like it. But I think in terms of, that is where we talk about like speaking to genres. Like, I'm making something in a specific genre because I like that genre and because I respond to it, and I'm trying to get other people who respond to that genre to, I'm trying to communicate to them, and I'm kind of picking my audience by having a genre, right? Like, I'm going to write a science fiction novel because I like science fiction and because I want to speak to people who like science fiction. The odds are that someone who doesn't like science fiction is not going to read my novel. Right?
Yeah, and I think that goes back to what I was saying before, where you just want to make the things that you want to see.
Yeah.
Because other people will have the same experience that you do, and they might not have the technical or like creative capability. And I think that everybody has some level of creativity, but they might not have the same creative ability to create that, but they still want to see it. They still want it to exist in the world, but they just don't know how to do it.
Yeah.
So like if you want to make something, if you have a vision for something, it's almost guaranteed that there will be people out there that want to experience it with you. And it's just finding a way to connect to those people.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And, one of the things interesting here is like Mintrovert is talking about they were born in 2002, and what they connect to their childhood is going to be incredibly different from what I connect to my childhood, because I was born so much further before that, and someone born this year is going to have a completely different childhood from Mintrovert. And it's really interesting that, one of the things I think this speaks to is this glut of comic book movies that we have. And it's a glut of really good comic book movies. And the reason is all those comic book fans who were, who grew up and are of a certain age now are of the, those people all grew up to be whatever they are. Maybe they're filmmakers, maybe they're writers, maybe they're artists. And they all saw crappy comic book movies and went, these suck. We want good comic book movies. And they're all now of the age that they can make what they want. And,
I find it, you can finish your thought, but I have something.
Well, and that's just to say that, it's one of those things that it was an underserved market, and then people who kind of, the market grew up into the point where they could fill that gap. And now it's like, now we're trying to have the quote unquote childhood we didn't have. Right. and what's funny is like the Star Wars is a good example. And I know Tim's not here, but Star Wars is a good example of the same kind of thing happening, where I know a number of people, actually you're one of them, Ben, who, are a bit younger than me, and Star Wars is like, yeah, it's cool, it's a thing. And I'm like, but it's Star Wars, what are you talking about? And I get it, because your childhood was different than mine. Star Wars was huge in when I was growing up, and it was a lot less huge. If you were born 10 years after me, it would have been a lot less huge. Or if and the further you got after that, the more kind of nostalgia it was, and the less like, when I was growing up, Star Wars was brand new. When you were growing up, Star Wars was nostalgia.
Yeah, Star Wars was something my parents watched and they talk about, but like I didn't feel about it the same way. I still watched the movies with them.
Yeah.
But I didn't really have the same connection. And I feel like the other connection that I make to that is Halo on the Xbox was the first like real FPS game for console.
Yeah.
That solidified the console, like the FPS genre in the console. And that's what everybody like kind of thinks about when they think about like a shooter on
Yeah, on a console.
On console.
Yeah.
Yeah, they have that same nostalgia for it. Same thing with movies like The Matrix,
Yeah.
which was huge for the time because it was a huge breakthrough in a lot of visual effects. And like I don't think it aged super well. I haven't watched it in a while, but either way, like people think about The Matrix in the same way that some people might think about Star Wars.
Oh yeah.
With the unfortunate sequels as well. But it's like all of that stuff. Like these were all very formative movies and genres to bring to people, and I think that people latch onto that. So yeah.
Well, and
that's really all I had to say for that.
Yeah, well, the funny thing with The Matrix is, and this goes back to what we're talking about, where it's mental baggage. One of the things about The Matrix, and even the sequels, I'm one of the few people who likes the sequels.
I actually haven't watched the sequels since they came out. I would like to go through and watch them again. I think that they were okay.
And you know what I will say makes the sequels better is watch 2 and 3 back to back.
Yeah. Well, that's how they were released basically too. Like,
well, they were released about
came out
6 months apart.
3 or 6 months apart. Yeah.
But if you actually watch them back to back and treat them as one long movie, it's better than if you try to watch them separately. Like watching just the second one, you're gonna be kind of like and watching just the third one, like yeah. But if you put them back to back, they work well as a larger piece. Or I feel like they work better as a larger piece. I mean, I could still, they're flawed. I mean, I'm not gonna argue.
A lot of the
great.
set pieces are a little like, okay, guys.
Yeah.
You've been watching a lot of anime, haven't you?
Oh, well,
which I guess isn't a bad thing.
That was entirely The Matrix. I mean, that was like it was essentially, hey, we watched a lot of anime and kung fu movies, so let's make a live action one.
Yeah, and I think people kind of didn't go into that movie expecting that, and when that's what happened, and it's just like, okay.
Yeah. Although the one thing I will say about The Matrix that I really liked, and it carried through into the sequels, and this was, again, baggage that I brought with me, is all of the things in The Matrix have this, like, philosophical underpinning. In terms of, like, story and in terms of, like, character development, there's all this like philosophy in it, and I love that. And I felt like movies at the time weren't really doing that kind of thing. And so for me, walking into that, I was like, "Whoa, this is an action movie that has this like intellectual depth that what other action movie has this, right? Like Die Hard does not have this like big philosophical argument to make, and looking at the sequels, arguably maybe it didn't have this philosophical statement that I think people originally thought it might.
I think it ran out of gas a little bit, but there's actually a book talking about all the philosophical angles from The Matrix. I don't know if you've read it. I don't think I have it. I used to own it, but I think I donated it. But if I find it, I'll let you borrow it.
Yeah, that would be super cool. And that was, but that again, like one of the reasons I am a big fan of the Matrix movies is that they did that, is that they kind of put all this philosophy into the movies, and I feel like that is something they did that spoke to me. And they kind of knew their audience in that respect, or at least found their audience that way. And that's something that I think, like, something to keep in mind is, and maybe this just boils down to like knowing your audience, like who are you talking to, and how are you going to speak to them, and how do they want to be spoken to? Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. And I think even further expanding on that, it's just like talking to people, like the audience that you want are people that are very similar to you in some ways, because you're just talking to yourself when you're making something, because often when you're making something, it's a conversation with yourself. Even when like I'm streaming, when I'm making music, it's still a conversation with myself. It's just there's outside input coming in as well. And it's just when I make music for myself. And I think a lot of people speak to myself or speak the same way that I do. It just, that doesn't really make a lot of sense, I don't think. Or at least I'm not saying it the right way. Where it's basically like I have a certain personality, and I think a lot of other people have a similar personality where the music that I make speaks to them as well. I guess that's a better way of putting it.
Yeah, I
don't know.
agree.
I'm kinda
And
tired.
you know, and no, but what you said makes sense. I mean,
Yeah.
you know, there's a lot of doing this is part of it is finding your audience, and finding your audience often means, you know, finding the people who are into the same things you are, and
Yep.
who are maybe getting the references you're putting down in your music, you know, or in your art in general, right? You know, I
Your
mean,
movies or your stories or anything. It's
yeah,
like,
I mean, if people are picking up the things that you're putting in, and when you put in the Doctor Who theme briefly in a little solo somewhere, and like somebody picks up on it, and they're like, "Ah, I see what you did. That's great." You know, that's like, you know, that you're like, yes, you are my people, right? Because it's like, yeah, you got that thing that I kind of put out there, and like it, you know, it resonated with you because we're kind of on the same wavelength.
yeah. Or if you're like me and accidentally put the McDonald's theme in your song last week.
Yeah, that's okay. I have a song that, and I can't remember which song it is, but one of the ones I put out recently, it's up on either SoundCloud or Clip It right now, is starts out like the Final Countdown. It's
Nice.
piano. It's piano,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
the first like 4 notes are like da 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 da, and then it goes in a different direction. But
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
and it's hilarious. And I didn't even do that on purpose.
Well,
I
no,
wasn't
yeah.
even going like, oh, I'm gonna make it the Final Countdown. I kind of independently went like, oh, this just sounds good. And then after I was done, I listened to it and I went, that's not the Final Countdown, is it? Oh crap, that's the Final Countdown.
Yeah, and I mean, I didn't intentionally do mine either. It's just like, well, I want to climb the major scale and end on the 5. So, I mean, is 1, 2, 3, 6, 5? Ba da ba ba ba. I mean, that's all it is. And
Yeah, and that was
I found out after the fact when somebody on Stream Chat mentioned it. I'm like, oh shoot.
and that was the
I
same
kicked it in
thing.
because
Yeah, that was the same thing doing the Final Countdown, because it's a very simple scalar move. It's like, I think it's like 5/4 and like, you know, 5/4 back up to the 5 and then like 1 or 2, something like.
Yeah.
It's like, it's a very simple scalar melody. So it's something that you kind of immediately go like, oh, this really works because it's working with the chords, it's working with the scale. You know, like it's all, it's like perfect. And it's like you don't realize that all of a sudden you've got the McDonald's theme in your in your song.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, there's a whole topic to be discussed there about making things that are recognizable and like simple enough that anybody can understand and enjoy them. But I don't know if that's really within the purview of this topic since we're already an hour in.
Yeah, we're probably going to wrap it up here soon. Although I did want to mention one thing. I think it was Mintrovert, a lot further up in the chat, said that they were uncomfortable with the idea that everything has been written/invented, and they want to feel like there is always something new to be invented or written. And on the one hand, I absolutely want to agree with that. On the other hand, I can't tell you how many things I've quote unquote written like that, and then realized later, wow, that's actually this other thing.
Mm-hmm.
So
that's not a bad thing.
Yeah, it's not a bad
thing at all.
It's not a bad thing at all. It's just funny how much there is probably undiscovered, and then there's probably, it's funny how much has been kind of already done, and now you're doing your take on it. Yep. And there's nothing wrong with either way, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I think that there is, from the album Creationism that I put out, I think there's actually a song with a very, very powerful quote from somebody talking about that, and I will try to find it super quick because it's very Borrow Don't Steal from Scott Bolster. I don't know if I'll read the whole thing, but don't be afraid to borrow chord progressions, sounds, little ditties, tiny things, just snatch them all up. And one of the reasons why I can churn out stuff, he is a very prolific artist as well, because he doesn't have a problem reusing or borrowing something that he heard. And he used to, because he thought he wasn't original, not creative. But he quickly found out that, now I switched from I to he, and now that's messing up.
It doesn't matter. Keep going.
I found out that I am not original or creative. I can't make up a new thing. And I very much doubt that any other people that listen to any people that I listened to were the first to think of a particular progression or melody, just because. And once you get over that, sounding good is easy because you know how to borrow.
Yeah.
So basically, just copy it and just do a little changey thing and then pretend it like it was yours, and nobody will know. And nobody does know because the new generation can now steal everything from the older generation and pretend that it's theirs. And he goes on a bit longer, but it's a really, really good quote. And I'll post this in the show notes as well.
Yeah,
and I posted it in chat as well.
And you know what's funny is I was listening to Song Exploder, which is a podcast where they take apart mainstream songs and talk with the artist and literally get like essentially all the stems and kind of play the individual pieces and talk about how those pieces were made, and then you hear the whole song at the end. And they were talking to Rivers Cuomo of Weezer, and he essentially does exactly what that person, the person you interviewed, or the person you quoted, said, where he listens to songs and figures out the chord progressions. He records them himself on guitar. He just figures out the chords, kind of records his own version of it, stores it away, doesn't store it with the name of the song that it came from. And then, like a year later, 6 months later, when he's working on music, he's going, he looks through his, all these chord progressions that he has, and, comes up with one that he likes. He's completely borrowed it from someplace else, but he's essentially made it his own. By the time he gets back to it, he has no idea where it came from. He has no idea, he just kind of figures it out again. And now it's kind of twice removed from where it started, but it's entirely from another song, and he's literally just borrowing it.
Yeah, there's been a couple songs that started as remixes for me and ended as original songs because I liked it too much to like follow the remix angle. Yeah. Where it's just like, I really like this chord progression and what I did with it, and I don't really want to follow what the original song was anymore. Yeah. So I just kind of went off in my own direction with it, and some of my favorite songs ended up like that, where it's just like, yeah, I stole the chord progression, but that's not anything new. 90% of this music out there right now uses the same chord progression.
Oh yeah, and it's what's hilarious is there was I again, one of the ones I did recently, and I can't think of the name of the song. I actually I ended up coming up with a very standard chord progression because I started playing all these substitutions and did not realize that I had come up with the what is it, 1564? Yeah, 1564. 1-5, the minor 6, and then the major 4, which is this like incredibly standard, you hear it everywhere chord progression. And I completely snuck up on it because I was like playing all these yes, Toxic, you are correct, and I'll speak to that in a moment. I entirely came up with this chord progression in like these substitution chords. There were all these sevenths and ninths and things going on where I was playing a chord on top of a chord, and I'm going like, oh, this sounds so good. And then like, well, what if I do this? And then what if I substitute this for that? And and then I eventually kind of like, this sounds really cool. And I'm in the middle of going through the song, and I went, wait a minute. If I break this down, because now I realize that I'm A, in the key of C, even though I'm not playing a C major chord. B, hey, wait a minute. If this is this and that's that, then this is the 6th and that's the 4th. Oh my God.
Yep. Yeah, when I was 15 or so and playing around on the piano, I accidentally invented Pachelbel's canon. So I know how that goes, where it's just like, oh, this sounds great, and then I was like, oh yeah, because Pachelbel's canon is a very logical progression. It just really is the circle of fifths, but it's just like, oh, this sounds really good, and like I should write it down, and then I realized what I did. So
I was noodling on a piano about the same age. I was about 16, and I eventually realized that I had invented "Take Me Home" by Phil Collins.
Yeah, exactly. So, yep, it happens.
It was very funny. It was like, oh, I wrote this thing and it was great, and then, oh, wait, no, this is actually "Take Me Home," just slowed down slightly and moved around just a little bit. Toxic is completely right, though. He had to reconstruct my bass line because he did not believe that it came from one of your spring samples. And what was really funny is Toxic is the one who noticed when I gave him the stems, because he did a remix of my stuff.
Yeah.
I think Garion did the remix. Sorry, but I think Toxic was also kind of interested in that stuff. And Garion noticed that my bass line was actually off key. Because I had taken your spring sample and I had manipulated it so that it was this, kind of bass line thing, and it turns out it's somewhere between a G and a G sharp.
Yeah,
and I just treated it as a G sharp, and just I was like, nope, it's a G sharp. Here we go. And apparently it's actually not quite a G sharp. And now that I listen to it and it's been pointed out to me, I'm like, yeah, it's a little flat, but
yeah, okay. And that's a whole nother topic. And I think we've touched on it in the past, but trying not to strive for perfection in music is another really important thing.
Yeah, so, absolutely. So
on the Trello board.
Yeah, definitely. We can absolutely put that in the topics for another time. But I think on that note, we have reached our social interaction quota for the week.
Thumbs up.
We are no longer going to be speaking to anyone for the rest of the week.
Oh God, I can't wait.
So Benjamin Burns, where can people find you on the interwebs?
You can find me on the interwebs at Twitch, Twitter, Patreon, and YouTube at Ben_Burns. That's BURNES. I primarily write music, but I do a lot of other weird crap. So check all those out, and maybe you'll find something interesting.
And people can find me at ZaxxusEMK on Twitter, on twitch.tv/ZaxxusEMK. And we timed this perfectly because I just lost my camera. So we'll put up the static image. You can find me at ZaxxusEMK on Twitter, twitch.tv/ZaxxusEMK, youtube.com/EricKleinCreate. The show is available on Stitcher, Google Play, iTunes, and wherever fine podcasts are sold. Our website is mandatorysocial.com. You can get all the previous episodes there. The theme song is Protofunk by Kevin Macleod. That's at incompetech.com. And the background music that we play throughout the show is all by Ben Burns. And you can find that at abstractionmusic.com. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Thanks for listening. Thanks to everyone in the chat. You've all been amazing as usual. We love hanging out with you. And that's going to do it for the show. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
All right, cool. I'm going to stop the recording. I'm going to stop recording.